So a little bit of who I am. I think a lot of you know me, but maybe not some of the details. I was actually born in Cuba, and I'll date myself a little bit by saying that our parents brought us here just a couple of months before the Cuban Missile Crisis. So for those of you that know your history, you start to get an idea of how old I am. It's pretty old. I was raised pretty much with every other Cuban American in the country in Miami, Florida, in a little area of Miami, Florida that's called Little Havana. So that's where I grew up. Went to Miami High School, which is this monstrous high school that was 95% Cuban, 4.5% African American, and 0.5% maybe white, Asian, and everything else. I've been married 37 years to my wonderful wife, Linda. We have 3 kids still here on earth. We have 6 in heaven, we hope. We struggled with miscarriages. I know many of you do have as well. And we have 6 wonderful grandkids now, which really are the joy of our life. We like them much better than our kids, for sure. So, I've worked now for 33 years. I still have a secular job. 33 years at General Mills, kind of doing the same data analysis job in the cereal division. So, been very, very good, very consistent for our family. And my own conversion or reversion to the faith, I'll talk a little bit about that later, came amidst the cross. It came amidst the period of suffering in my life while we were struggling with our marriage and really to the point of imminent divorce a number of years ago. I've been ordained a deacon for, it'll be 10 years this fall, amazingly enough. I spent the first 7.5 roughly at the Church of St. Stephen in Minneapolis, which is a largely Hispanic church. 2 masses in Spanish, 1 in English, and I've spent the last 2 years at Our Lady of Guadalupe Parish, which is again a largely Hispanic church, 2 masses in Spanish, 1 in English. So given my fluency in Spanish, I think I'm probably going to be in Spanish churches for pretty much the rest of my life, which is wonderful. It's a joy to be there. I do feel, and as many of you know, I serve here on Friday mornings when on Deacon Jim's day off to help Father, because he can't really function without a deacon, which is clear. So I do feel sorry for you guys, because when Ryan asked me to do this, I feel like I'm one of the least qualified people to do this. I remember, just as an example, I remember the first time that I was allowed to do marriage prep at the Church of St. Stephen. I had only been ordained a couple of years, and at the time they didn't know about my own marital difficulties. So we met with this couple, I met with this couple, and you know, the first meeting in any marriage preparation is, hey, how you doing? Nice to know you. Here's how it's going to be for the next several months as we prepare you for your wedding day. And the couple got into a huge fight just in that introductory period. And it took 2.5 years before they were married. So marriage preparation turned into marriage counseling. And so I'm afraid you probably have to take most of what I say tonight with a grain of salt. So I really want to keep this as informal as possible. Don't let PowerPoint fool you. I really want this to be a conversation. As I look around, I see a lot of men in this parish who have been married a good long time and have a lot of experiences and wisdom that we can share with each other. So I think we can all learn from each other. So I really want this to be a conversation. Please ask questions if you have questions to ask, or if you feel that there's something you can contribute to the conversation. I'm really open to you doing that. Again, the PowerPoint is a crutch. Paul Fink will be one of the first to contribute. He's back there smiling and saying, I want to say something to these men. So that'll be good. At some point we'll call on him and have him come up and say something. Some wisdom. I think the PowerPoint and the notes are just because at this point in my life I can't remember everything that goes into my head disappears 5 minutes later, so it's a little bit of a crutch. So fair enough, we're jumping in. I think one of the things that you'll see too is I'm a little bit enamored with theology, and I get a little bit lost in it sometimes. So if I'm like saying a bunch of stuff here that you're like, whatever, it's just me getting lost in my own little theological world that I enjoy so much. So, okay. Well, it turns out that this topic of marriage is a pretty important topic. That's why I'm thrilled that the topic is about marriage enrichment. Marriage and family are important. We see this in the church's documents, so beautifully reflected so often in so many places. Here we have a quote from the Catechism that's beautiful. The family is the original cell of social life. It's the natural society in which husband and wife are called to give themselves in love and in the gift of life. All authority, stability, and a life of relationships within the family constitute the foundations for freedom, security, and fraternity within society. So those are pretty big words about what this thing is. It's no surprise too that we see St. John Paul II writing about marriage a lot. This document, Familiaris Consortio, it's a beautiful document. One of the very powerful things John Paul says about marriage is that the future of humanity passes by way of the family. So it's that important. When we see these things, we have to realize that it's not just these theoretical things that these saints and popes and the church in her magisterium is speaking about, that these things apply very personally to each one of us. So it is this important that marriage, the way we individually live out our vocation to marriage, the way we live it out will have an influence on the way that society goes. So just for a show of hands, how many are here are actually married? Okay, I should have asked. Let me put your hands down. How many are not married? I'm trying to figure out what they're getting themselves into one day. Okay, so one person. Okay, so this is the vocation. I asked because it's if there were folks that weren't married here that were still discerning their vocation, it's important to remember that even if we're called to the priesthood, everything I'm going to say applies to those that are called to the priesthood, because you can't be a good priest if you couldn't have been a good father. And you can't be a good father if you couldn't have been a good priest. So the two are really, that fatherhood and the sacrificial love are united in both vocations. So the church speaks very beautifully about marriage and the importance of marriage. But we know that anything that's this important will draw the attention of the enemy. We know too well that besides our own weaknesses and sinfulness, our own laziness and aversion to suffering and sacrifice, that there's always someone who's quite interested in us as men failing at this vocation. We know that the devil hates us, and we know that the devil wants to destroy us personally, and he wants to destroy society as a whole. So he hates families in particular. Why? Because he believes what John Paul said about marriage, that the future of society passes by way of the family. So the devil's greatest priority is to destroy marriage and family. So we need to expect that as we live out our vocation, that the enemy will be sowing seeds of discord, of unforgiveness, of resentment, of bitterness, of jealousy, and all of those things that he continues to sow to try to destroy our family. So as 1 Peter reminds us, we need to be sober and vigilant. Realize that we're at war, and that on this uplifting note, we'll jump right in. Okay, I wanted to speak just a couple minutes about the dignity of marriage. I think when we enter into marriage, we're attracted to our wives, we begin dating, we propose, we get married, we start having kids, and life is good. But I don't think we fully realize when we said I do, what we actually said I do to. And I mean that, I'll talk about practically speaking, but I mean that from the point of the sacredness of what it means to say I do. So in order to understand almost anything, but certainly our own dignity as human beings and of marriage, we have to begin by going right back to the beginning, to the very first pages of the Bible, and the dawn of creation, when on the sixth day, God created his greatest masterpiece. He left the best for last, and that best is mankind. And he created us male and female. And he didn't just create us, but he created us in his own image and likeness. You know, I think we hear these words so often, don't we? Image and likeness, created in his image and likeness, that it's easy to just kind of gloss over them and lose the intensity and the power of those words. We're mysteriously like God. You know, soak on that for a minute. We can actually know something about God by looking at ourselves and how we live. And we're meant to image God in this world, right? If we're called to be images of God, if we are an image of God, then we're called to image God to others in this world. So after God creates us in his own image and likeness, then he immediately institutes marriage. And he commands these two newly made images of his to come together and to be fruitful. So this is our profound dignity as we're made in the image and likeness of God. So I'm just going to let you look at this for a minute. So what does it mean to be made in the image and likeness of God? Now, of course, individually, we know that we have an immortal soul and we have free will. And of course, those things make us like God, in the image and likeness of God. But the mysteries of gender and marriage, I think, give us even a greater insight into what it means to be made in the image and likeness of God. You know, it turns out, funny thing, that being male and female actually matters. It's important. In the sexes, there's a necessary and even, I would say, sacred complementarity. We know men and women are different, so we know that physically, certainly, but they're different also psychologically. They're different emotionally. They're different spiritually. And this isn't an accident. This is all part of God's design. Other than the obvious physical part of the necessary complementarity between men and women, there's a great mystery in the fact that men and women each have unique qualities, gifts, charisms, things that belong to their gender specifically, that are part of their being made uniquely in the image and likeness of God. And interestingly, each of the different sexes or genders have these qualities that make them in the image and likeness of God that the other gender doesn't have. So when they come together in marriage, they come together literally to complete each other, to make up, each one making up what is lacking in the other, to make them a richer, fuller image of God. And by way of their sacramental union, they create a new reality. So we hear those words in Scripture, they are no longer two, but one flesh. And it is a brand new reality that's created when husband and wife come together. And in this new reality forged in love and through the sacrament of marriage, male and female, through a mutual self-donation of the totality of their lives, of everything they are, they unite in such a profound way that 9 months later, as we know, we have to name that new union. Because they've cooperated with God to bring new life into the world. Now, as you look at these two images, I wonder where God got the idea for this community of love and life that we call marriage. What do you think? You know, how about looking at himself in the mirror? Right? It's powerful. And it's primarily through the family and how we each in our own families live out marital love and family life that we reflect God to the world. When the world sees the family, it's meant to see God present in the world, active in the world. It's that important, and it's obviously for that reason that the enemy is so interested in making sure that this does not work. So once we understand this amazing thing that we call marriage and family, and that it's meant to be literally the visible imprint of the love that is the Holy Trinity in our world, many replicas of the Trinity all over the world, then we can begin to see the truth and wisdom of the church's teaching about marital love. And the reason is because it isn't just about husband and wife. It's about how God loves within his own divine family in the Trinity, and it's about how God has loved the world all throughout salvation history. So we see so many places in the Old Testament where God is talking about his love for us, for his holy people, really in nuptial language, in marital language. So when the church teaches about marital love, what the church teaches about marital love is precisely how God loves within his own family. Unconditional love, which is total, life-giving, faithful, and forever. And this is exactly how he calls each one of us to love within our own families, to love our wives. And you might remember these words because each one of you made a promise to uphold these until death do you part when you got married. So have you all remembered these words, I hope? So we start to understand in all of these why Jesus was so adamant about divorce, right? And divorce and remarriage in particular, but right, to break that union, assuming we all kind of understood what we were getting into, but to break that union is to tear apart the very image of God in the world. And it makes it harder for those in society to come to Jesus, to see Jesus really alive in the world. So what does this look like tangibly? It brings us to the topic of the title of our talk this morning, or this afternoon, I should say. Jesus is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn of all creation. So he shows us in a very concrete way in his sacred humanity what it means to love. The great passage from Ephesians 5, which we took our title from, says, "Husbands, love your wives, even as Christ loved the church." And this beautiful passage is really the secret to living out the very lofty vocation that each of us were called to. And it begs the question, how did Christ love the church? Well, in that passage in Ephesians, St. Paul takes this dramatic question and he brings it to the Ephesians as he says, "Husbands, love your wives, even as Christ loved the church." And he says in essence to the Ephesians, husbands, take a good long look at the love of Christ manifested especially on the cross. And that's how you treat your wife. In summary, self-sacrificing love. And this was really, at the time, it was really an amazing thing to say. Given the culture of the time, it was really a shocking thing to say. Now, even if we look beyond the cross, even if we look at how Christ loved the church during his time on earth from cradle to grave, and how God has created each one of us to love, we can pretty easily come up with a checklist. If you look on the left, that's the do's, the right is the don'ts, right? So we can pretty easily, just by seeing how Jesus loved, come up with this list of what authentic love is. And this is, as men, how we're called to love our wives. I mean, it's a pretty long list, and it's pretty daunting, and it's hard. There's just no two ways around it, right? It's hard to do these things, to love this way, day in and day out. Now, if I tried to cover every one of these things for the next couple of minutes, I'd be here for a couple of days. So I'm just going to focus on three that I think really kind of surround all the other ones. And those are humility, servant leadership, and sacrificial love. I know they're all intertwined, and I think you'll hear that as we talk about them. But that's okay, because I think these are the three that are most important. So the first thing I did is I consulted my theological guide, Google, and I just said, I'm serious, that's true, that's how bad I am. But, and I just keyed in, passages in the Bible where Jesus is loving in humility. Well, of course, a whole slew of things came up, and this was the order. And I want you to just look at the words that are part of these passages that are so powerful and so active. Do nothing out of selfishness or out of vainglory. And we should just think about these as a little bit of an examination of conscience about how we are living out our own marital love. Do nothing out of selfishness or out of vainglory. Rather, humbly regard others as more important than yourselves. Humbly regard your wives as more important than yourself. Why? Because Jesus, though he was in the form of God, did not deem equality with God something to be grasped. Rather, he emptied himself, taking the form of a slave, being born in the likeness of men. Right? These words, these are powerful words. They're difficult, but they're powerful words. Then he went down to Nazareth and was obedient to them. This is the finding in the temple. He fasted for 40 days and 40 nights, and afterwards he was hungry. And I can go on and on. Jesus did not please himself, as it is written. St. John's words, he must increase, I must decrease. When we start to focus on these words and these passages, we know that Jesus is the author of existence. He's the Alpha and the Omega, the first and the last, the beginning and the end. He's the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords, yet he humbled himself. And how did he do that? By taking on our human nature to begin with, by taking upon himself all that belongs to our frail human condition, sorrow, tiredness, hunger, thirst, poverty, homelessness, submitting his will to the will of others, refusing honors, taking on our infirmities, and putting our needs above his own, right? This is what Jesus did. So what about our marriages? Do we exalt ourselves as king of our castles? Even subconsciously. I know a lot of you, it can happen so easily subconsciously, right? Even if we don't aren't doing it overtly. Do we look at our wives as equals? Or do we grasp onto that, what I call the favorite male passage in the Bible? Wives should be subordinate to their husbands as to the Lord. For the husband is head of the wife as Christ is head of the church. Do we take that passage and use it, again, even subconsciously, to be selfish, to get our way, to get what we want? Now, as men, we are the spiritual leaders of our homes. This is something that's God ordained, so we have to embrace this, but do we do this in humility, or do we do this in tyranny and pride? Do we humbly regard the needs of our wives as more important than our own? If we love our wives in humility, I think we can even apply those words that St. John the Baptist wrote about he in Christ, and perhaps substitute the word, she must increase and I must decrease. All right, jumping to servant leadership. My friend Google was very generous here as well. But Jesus, one of my favorite passages, the disciples were off and they were trying to decide which one of them was the greatest. Who was going to be the best? Who was going to have the highest place in heaven? So Jesus summoned them and said, "You know that the rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them, and the great ones make their authority over them felt." Could be very true of many husbands. But it shall not be so among you. Rather, whoever wishes to be great among you shall be your servant. Whoever wishes to be first among you shall be your slave. That's a hard word. Just so the Son of Man, the author of life, did not come to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for the many. Then that beautiful passage at the Last Supper, when Jesus washes the feet of his disciples, and he says, "If I therefore, master and teacher, have washed your feet, you ought to wash one another's feet. I have given you a model to follow, so that as I have done for you, you should also do. For who is greater, the one seated at table or the one who serves? Is it not the one seated at table? But I am among you as one who serves. The other one, tend the flock of God in your midst, not by constraint, but willingly, as God would have it, not for shameful profit, but eagerly. Do not lord it over those assigned to you, but be examples to the flock." Servant leadership is how we live out that very first point of humility in our marriage and our lives. So servant leadership is the action, the active part of humility. So we come back to our roles as spiritual leaders in our families. The gospel calls us to a radical reorientation of our minds as we bring those paradoxes that we see all through Christianity into our marriage life. Poverty is wealth. Greatest is a servant and slave to all. To die means to live. To lose yourself, to lose your life, means to find it. The human person is made to serve. The human person is made to give himself away in love, to serve others. So again, we see, although this is hard, we know that peace comes from it. You remember that beautiful prayer of Mother Teresa where she says the fruit of silence is prayer, and then she goes on. Well, the very last part of that prayer is the fruit of service is peace, right? So when we are who God made us to be, there's always peace. Even though there's struggle, even though there's tension, even though there's breaking our own will is hard, but there's always peace. The final one, sacrificial love. And again, as we read these passages, look at the very active language that's used here, right? There's nothing passive about this. Look at the very active language that's used. Husbands, love your wives, even as Christ loved the church and handed himself over for her. Jesus said to his disciples, "This is my commandment, love one another as I love you. No one has greater love than this, to lay down one's life for one's friends." Jesus said to his disciples, "If anyone wishes to come after me, he must deny himself and take up his cross daily and follow me." And we go on and on, right? Listen to those active words, right? Sacrificial love means dying to yourself. It means breaking your own wills. And this one envelops all the rest of them. It's at the heart of what it means to be a Christian, and it's at the heart of what it means to be a husband. To love sacrificially, again, means to die to self, to serve, to pour ourselves out for our wives and our children until it hurts, even unto death. We know that without sacrificial love, it's impossible to please God, and it's impossible to love. When Jesus was in the garden, he said, "Father, let this cup pass from me, but not my will, but yours be done." It cost Jesus something to sacrifice, to love sacrificially. Now, in these very active words from these passages above, we see, first of all, that love, sacrificial love, is a decision. It's not a feeling. Even though feelings do come with the decision at some points. I'll bet that Jesus didn't have a lot of positive feelings about taking the weight of human sin on his shoulders and going through his passion and death. He wasn't jumping up and down and yelling yippee skippy, was he? But he did this out of love for us. And we all know that there's a lot of times in our marriages where we're called to love our wives in a certain way, but it takes sacrificial love. It costs us something. The feelings aren't there. We don't want to do it, but we know it's something we need to do. we also see that sacrificial love is unconditional. Jesus didn't say, yes, Father, I'll definitely think about humbling myself to become one of them, and I may even suffer and die for them, but I need you to tell me something first. What's in it for me? What do I get out of all of this? No, instead he said yes. He said so unconditionally for love of us. So we need to love our wives selflessly and sacrificially without expecting anything in return. And that's a hard one. That's a hard one. I'll give you just a brief testimony of my own life back to that time in my life. I think we might have been married only about 6 or 7 years. And almost overnight our marriage fell apart. It was almost overnight because, of my own blindness. It's so funny the way it works, but looking back, I was so engulfed in just seeking the things of the world, just getting a better job and, all the things that we shoot for, right, that we think make success, right, buying a house, all the little things that we've got a list of and we check off and, okay, we're doing all right in life. But meanwhile, I was living very selfishly. We got married pretty young anyways, but I was very, very selfish and immature. And I wasn't really honoring my wife the way I should have. And, pretty much, if you see all this stuff that I'm talking about, yes, there's a little bit of, study that has gone into this, but most of it, as Carrie put on the posters, came from the School of Hard Knocks, learned it the hard way, which I don't recommend, typically, necessarily, but it's so funny. One day I came home from work, we had kind of been checking off all these things we wanted to do, buy a house, have a family. And then I came home from work, and I had been so blinded to the fact of there being problems that I got home and my wife said that she wanted a divorce. So imagine that, after 7 years and 2 kids, and without the funny part was not even knowing that anything was even wrong, let alone that anything had gotten so serious that there was ready for a divorce. So obviously this sent me into kind of a time of just incredible suffering. And my wife was pretty resolute about getting a divorce, but talked her into agreeing to a separation, and so we were separated on and off for about 2 years. And it was tremendous suffering during that time. And somewhere in about, maybe a third of the way into this 2-year period, a brother of mine gave me a book about Marian apparitions. And it's one of those funny things that it's just, I wasn't even that interested really at the time at the church. I mean, I was raised Catholic, but I really wasn't interested in the church, theology, pretty much any of it. And for some reason, probably because of being in such suffering and desperation and just wanting the suffering to go away, not wanting to face the cross, this book, I just read a few pages of it, and it was just really a little pamphlet on Marian apparitions that had occurred in the world. And I remember just being struck by the fact of the profound love of God for us, that He would send His mother into the world to build us up and to remind us of everything that Jesus had taught. And it just really hit me profoundly. And it was one of those moments of grace where I opened up my heart just a little bit and the floodgates of grace just flowed in. And from that moment on, my life just changed in a moment. I think I probably felt the love of God for me personally for the first time. And I think I started to realize that, eventually I came to realize that it was hard for me to love the way I was supposed to love sacrificially, because I hadn't felt that love of God that is sacrificial and humble and servant leadership oriented, right? So really that profound moment, that encounter with Jesus, really in the Holy Spirit, I went kind of berserk. I started to do nothing but, I just wanted to learn more about this faith, this church. I got books, I got audio tapes, I listened to stuff driving. I pull over sometimes and I'd stop driving on the way to work because I didn't want to a tape that I was listening to at the time to end. You know, it was that stuff. Just, and I knew that it was all true. I mean, I knew that every bit of it was true. And it really, I think, to make a very long story shorter, what ultimately happened is, by experiencing God's love, I started to change, and I started to see, because as far as I was concerned, it was my wife's fault, right? She's the one that wanted the divorce. She's the one that wanted to break up the marriage. But I started to see my own significant role in this, and that I wasn't loving sacrifice. So I started to change, and I started to change a lot in a lot of different ways. And over time, my wife started to see this, and you know, we eventually came together, and you know, it's been 30 plus years now. Beyond that, that have been, you know, again, haven't been easy, but and it's a daily kind of transformation. But you know, I was called, I get called an insensitive jerk just once a week now, and it used to be 3 times a day. So I think that's progress, right? So what I want to do is I want to just end with just a couple of thoughts, and I mean, they're really more related to what I learned through my own personal experience, and obviously through my own study as a deacon. But I mean, it's never too late to do this, and no matter how good our marriages are, they can get better, right? They can get better. So again, I know many of you are very committed to your wives and families, but I think the first thing that I learned is you can't, I mean, it comes down to you can't give what you don't have, right? If we're called to love sacrificially and to give that love to the world, to our wives and in the world, and that flows from the love of God, and it was my personal experience, right? I can't love unless I've been loved, right? So I think it's so important, and I know many of us do this, but it's so important to seek union with God, right? That this be our number one unswerving goal in life, to seek union with God, right? It should be everything for us, right? And so I think it's just good to look at our spiritual life and see, you know, where am I potentially deficient here, right? Where am I putting things that are part of my life in the way of my ability to draw closer to God, right? So, and we know, I mean, praying the rosary, you know, devotion to Mary, adoration, daily mass, you know, just daily prayer, certainly taking advantage of the sacrament, the power of the sacramental life of the church, the sacraments, each being an encounter with Christ. So those are all ways that we can grow intensely in our union with God. But I think one thing here too that would be helpful is to invite, if you haven't, and I think even for very mature, spiritually mature marriages, I don't know how many husbands are praying with their wives. Okay, and so I think it'd be a good thing to start to take steps in that direction if you haven't, right? Especially the rosary. I think the rosary is such a beautiful family prayer, and perhaps just even extending the invitation to your wife, and you know, hey, I think it'd be great for our marriage if we prayed more together. You know, maybe we can pray the rosary together, and then take the opportunity to do that maybe after dinner or before dinner or whatever makes sense for your family. I'm probably here giving you a lot of advice to people that still have kids at home, and I'm an empty nester, so it may not be jiving, but you get the picture. You know, the other that I think is really extremely helpful, just in general, and this is a place where I fall down a lot because I just forget to do it sometimes, but the practice, all the great spiritual writers say that the practice of a nightly examination of conscience is just a real powerful way to advance your spiritual life. But I think it's also a good way to think about, as we think about some of these things we were just hearing in the scriptures, is to start to put these things in our nightly examination of conscience. You know, how am I doing in my relationship with my wife? You know, did I die to myself today and put her first? You know, did I do anything special for my wife today? Right? So any one of these things, I think to just include this just more overtly in your examination of conscience, along with the Ten Commandments, I think is just a really good spiritual practice, and it keeps that our vocation and how we're doing with our vocation front and center each and every day. Okay? So just a couple more. Listening and communication, one of the great strengths of men, right? Sharing our feelings with our wives, and we all do that very well, don't we? So these are a few, I love these cartoons. The one in the upper left, the husband says, "So I forgot my wedding vows. You expect me to remember a conversation we had 25 years ago?" You know, that's fair. On the upper right, I talked about my feelings on our wedding day. If anything changes, I'll let you know. That's another one. I know these apply to me, so maybe they apply to some of you too. The one on the bottom, for our anniversary, I'm putting in a wine cellar. I need a place to keep my emotions bottled up. I think that speaks more to our wives than it does to us, but if unless it might not have been totally me during that time that where we just all of a sudden it happened overnight, but maybe we shouldn't be on the hook to remember a conversation we had 25 years ago, but maybe 20 minutes ago, yeah, probably. If we make the effort to truly listen to our wife and not just hear that she's talking. And I think it wouldn't kill us to take that whole theological concept of the two becoming one a little more seriously and try to make the effort to share our feelings with our wives, as hard as it is for us. And the final one, I think working to anticipate our wives in love. So I think this is a great way to conquer selfishness, to die to self, to anticipate our wives in love and service. This really, I think, shows that we really are tuned in to who they are, what they like, what their needs are. When we do things for our wives that they didn't ask us for, it's a tremendous gift. Whether it be something very simple like, if we know that she loves flowers or candy, occasionally it's not going to kill us outside of Valentine's Day and birthdays and some of those other holy days of obligation when we have to give our wives stuff. It wouldn't kill us to get them something, right? Just without being asked, for no reason whatsoever, with nothing, not expecting anything in return, right? That's another hard part. Or perhaps, maybe it's just, I'm sure many of you already share in the work of the home, but just even cooking dinner, making breakfast without being asked, doing something like cleaning or taking care of the kids so that your wife can get out for a while with her friends. These are all little things that don't cost us a lot, but it's just a part of dying to ourselves and just really anticipating our wives in love that I think are very, very powerful. Wrapping up. There's nothing that would give me greater joy than to have your wives calling me or texting me in the next few weeks. Wait, that didn't sound right, did it? Let me do that again. Okay, have your wives calling me or texting me in the next few weeks and saying, "Deacon, I don't know what you said in that talk a couple of weeks ago, but whatever it was, I can't believe how my husband has been behaving." That would be a great joy. And I know these things are hard, and I know many of you are already living these things well, but again, it's going to involve humility, servant leadership, and self-sacrificing love. Difficult as they are, I think these are things that not only will bear fruit with our relationship with our wives, but again, we will put a face to the world of what God's love is all about. So my brothers, love your wives even as Christ loved the church. Thank you for the invitation tonight, and I'm open to any questions if you want to give some.